Let us proceed now to a more fundamental aspect of the human condition, something that encompasses not only philosophical thought, but science, the offspring of philosophy, as well as psychology, economics, and politics in general, particularly gender relationships, but on a broader scheme, manners and ideas and ideologies having to do with organizing systems. The basic premise here is quite simple, although it's mostly overlooked. It begins with the simple fact: the brain is a product of nature, and thusly it reflects natural processes. That is, anything that the human brain comes up with, invention, ideas, ideologies, morals, is based on a relationship between the organism and the environment. In other words, man samples the world, and then from this sampling, this experience, which is oftentimes passed on to future generations in the form of code, genes being a codified form of it, and more recently memes being a codified form of it. And by sampling the world, man then recombines these experiences, this knowledge, and creates new forms, unique forms. So if we understand genes correctly, genes are the accumulated experiences of not only the parents' experiences, but its parents and the parents of its parents. And these experiences are encoded in biomatter, and then, in other words, in genes, and then these are passed on to the offspring. Now the same occurs with what we call memes. Memes are a continuation of this genetic encoding, and memes take on the form of language or ideas or ideals or morals. So when we talk about genes, we're talking about the totality of the past represented and simplified into a code, which can then be passed on to the child, which then adds to it and passes it on to its child, and so on. With memes, we have the same thing. We have the encoding of all previous history in the form of language, words, ideas, and then these passed on again to future generations through this encoding. Now we're beginning to see that ideas do not spring out of the ether magically, do not come from some divine source. And unless you're a Christian, you don't ascribe to such infantile conceptions, infantile possibilities. Ideas are organic in that they are rooted in an organic tool, which is the brain, which samples the world, as I said, experiences it, and then forms ideas about it, concerning it, and forms also an attitude towards it, a psychology, a demeanor. To give a few examples, sexual roles are established through natural selection. They create a specialized form of sexual behavior, and these then morph into gender roles. That is, sexual roles are the application of gender roles are the application of sexual roles within social structures, particularly modern social structures, and they take on certain symbols. They are restricted or enhanced in accordance with the system's morals and the motives. Other forms of such abstraction are the way resources are abstracted into money, wealth, and a more sophisticated adaptation of this abstraction, this abstracting practice, is how masculinity is abstracted into an institution. I might even give other forms of how this, from genes to memes, or this evolution rather, of memes occurs, or is abstracted, or morphs. For instance, astrology, which is the study of the planetary movements, a primitive form of it, eventually turns into astronomy and also psychology. Alchemy turns into chemistry. Politics turns into the study of how hierarchies come to be, how they interact, and how they interrelate. So ideas and ideologies do not come from some mystical, magical place. They are rooted in how man experiences his environment and how he reacts to it and adapts to it. In fact, everything that man invents, every ideology, every idea, every innovation, is rooted in what man has experienced in the past. For instance, when man invents the computer, he bases it on how his brain works, or how he understands that his brain works. When man invents a bulldozer, he takes his own appendages as an example, and in general he samples the natural world around him, and then tries to construct new unities by sampling this environment. In other words, everything is rooted from the past, or in the past, including ideas. From this we can conclude that each population reacts differently to its environment, because first of all, it has a different past than any other population, and secondly, because the environment is different than any other environment. That's why we have different cultures coming about in different parts of the world. Now, in recent times, there's been a kind of a uniformity of thinking across the world, and this can be easily explained. For instance, this worshipping of love, of tolerance, of the slandering of ego and pride, the diminishment of masculinity, and so on. These are not forms of human progression. They are merely forms of adapting to the circumstances. And what are the circumstances? Well, in today's world, and for quite some time, we have been experiencing demographic pressures, increasing populations, heterogeneous populations requiring to become homogenized and placated and controlled. And these increasing populations existing and increasing exponentially within a diminishing frontier, that is, an absence of frontier. The earth has no more frontiers to offer. There's no more ways to escape social structures. Everything is populated, everything is controlled, everything is monitored, and this creates the necessity for a certain psychology. This is why certain moral systems first come about in environments and cultures where the populations had reached a certain point where a certain attitude was necessitated. Now in the West, this occurred later because we had unsettled frontiers in the West. Once these frontiers were settled, then the attitude kind of sort of spread. We can see here that life becomes more and more complex as it progresses into higher life forms. Just as the human body assimilates cells which were once autonomous, so does the superorganism now assimilate organic life. In other words, humanity, human beings. What is a superorganism? Well, a superorganism can be anything. It could be a nation state, it could be a religious, a church, it could be an ideology. So we have these emergent superorganisms assimilating organic life, individuals, human individuals into their premises. And in order to assimilate something, you have to eradicate the resistance to assimilation, and then you have to reshape the up to that point independent organism in order to fit into this new structure, into this new ordering. That is, you have to eliminate any characteristics which inhibit its assimilation within the unity. And we can see this occurring in humanity, where such things as individuality, although promoted supposedly hypocritically, is really diminishing. Masculinity is becoming less and less viable, less and less tolerated. We see this in the uniformity of thought, in the uniformity of behavior, how the same ploys now work, how the study of human nature has developed methods which can control masses, which can manipulate masses subliminally without force. In fact, making the slave want to remain a slave, begging to remain a slave. Whereas in the past, when there was frontiers available and a more challenging environment existed, less sheltering, the masculine type was more valuable. Today, the masculine type is detrimental to internal harmony. Therefore, it is being emasculated. It is being inhibited from developing to its fullest. So we see biological males remaining on an infantile, adolescent level. But this is also the case with women. They're becoming more prissy, more sheltered, more delicate, and so more dependent upon the system. The goal here is to make the individual more and more dependent upon the superorganism. Just as the cell now in the human body cannot exist outside the human body, the goal here is to make the individual human unable to exist outside the superorganism. And just like the cell is given a specialized role, that is, a cell could be either a lung cell, a nerve cell, a skin cell, hair follicle, whatever, so too we see this specialization occurring within human populations, where somebody can know a lot about one subject and absolutely nothing about anything else. This makes him more and more dependent upon others, upon the so-called specialists. So specialization develops this dependence on specialists, and this prohibits any overview and the clear picture of the whole, since the specialist can only focus upon his specialty and cannot think anything besides it. Now, the reason, in my view, why this progression towards more and more complex unities is occurring is due to the increase in entropy. As entropy increases, then the reaction to it has to exponentially and in a reverse proportion increase. So as entropy increases, then ordering, or the energies required for ordering, increase in response to it. So this is why we go from the single cell to the multiple cell to the more complex organism, and from there to a more flexible organism, the one with a consciousness. And from there we go to the currently evolving superorganism. Morality is simply a code, a rule establishing the limits of internal behavior. So it imposes upon the individual a limit upon what he can do and what he cannot do. And since force is not always effective, the best way is to use indoctrination. That is to imbue the mind with a sense of dread or a sense of right and wrong, so that, or a sense that it cannot think outside these premises of good and evil. So then its behavior is limited by this inhibition, this stunting in development. So when we talk about politically correctness, we're talking about a prohibition to thinking, because after all, consciousness is about discrimination, and once discrimination is made into an evil, then consciousness is something that does not develop. It begins to deteriorate. We must understand that not everything is a upward movement towards better and better. The unities that develop are simply reactions to the environment. And now this could result in higher life forms, or it could degenerate into lower life forms. That is, there's cycles of ebb and flow. Doesn't mean that if something is before us that it is more, that it is inferior to what is present or what is future. The future does not automatically mean better or more sophisticated. In closing, ideas, ideals, innovations don't come from some platonic, idealized world. They don't come from some deity. They are a result of a organic mind interacting with its environment. The reason why certain moral systems dominate today, Slavish moral systems, Christian moral systems, degenerating moral systems, is because of overpopulation and the needs of the superorganism for more and more resources. This made it possible for certain types to come about and to be sheltered, because they were necessary for the system in order for the system to survive. The more docile, the more stupid, the more weak the individual was, the more he could be incorporated within the superorganism, and therefore the more desirable he or she was to the system. Therefore, sheltering occurred. That is, the weak were protected. They were allowed to reproduce, to procreate, to exist without having to face the natural culling methods that eliminate disease and unfitness and weakness. So weakness was perpetuated, resulting in more and more resources having to be dedicated towards dealing with this increase in weakness. Similar to how systems intervene upon the environment and produce pollution, intervening upon human nature, upon nature and how nature culls, has resulted in genetic pollution, which now is reaching a point where it's becoming too much for the system to handle. It is natural within such an environment with no frontiers that a certain demeanor would be proposed and necessitated. This is why certain moral systems became established and spread like wildfire, particularly amongst the lowest of the low. For instance, Christianity first infected the Roman Empire through the catacombs by offering hope to the slaves, to the low stratum of the Roman Empire. As the Roman Empire declined in power, and as quantity sometimes overwhelms quality, we get this rise of Christianity, and becoming eventually, under Byzantium, an established religion, and acquiring, ironically, a power of its own, becoming an established institutional force, which now imposes its will by pretending to be some representative of some god, some monist, authoritarian, totalitarian god in some magical, mystical place up in the heavens. the emergence and the development of certain ideas and ideologies cannot be separated from the biology. That is, the meme cannot be detached, severed from the genes. It is the continuation of it. And therefore, in order to seek out the roots of how some ideas develop, come about, are necessitated, one has to go back to the genes, to the past, and to see how this gene interacted with the environment. So it's a relationship between the mind with its environment. Now, because memetic evolution happens at a faster rate than genetic evolution, what happens is this discrepancy occurs between the organism and the morals and the ideologies he is called upon to adhere to. And this creates a kind of schizophrenia, as I've stated elsewhere, and a sense of disillusionment, detachment from the world, a sense of no belonging, of confusion. In fact, if there's one thing that can characterize a modern Western man, it's this confusion. This confusion which eventually results in a turning away, a burying oneself in the sand, a reluctance to see, to perceive, a wanting to escape, to run, to flee from the world. Or as it results to a oversimplification of the world, a black and white world where the complexity is diminished to the point where it no longer causes anxiety, because knowing what is black and white or what is good and evil lessens our anxiety concerning it, makes them more knowable to us.